And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are 5 things that I think Magic the Gathering has gone too far with, right? These are essentially mechanics or abilities, however you want to group them, that I think they just have really gone too far with in the game of Magic, which of course affects the Commander format as well. This is my month of controversial videos, and this is another one that I think is a tad controversial. It is also my Patreon month, by the way. If you're interested at all in that, I have my Patreon link in the description below. Feel free to join. I'm doing tons of Patreon content this month, and I also have my Into the AM, if you can see my really fancy looking t-shirt here. That link is in the description as well. Promo code EDHDeck if you're at all interested. It helps support the channel. So let's get to the subject that I'm talking about here. So for example, I'm starting out at number 5 with Indestructible. So this is an ability, and it's an ability that came out way back in Mirrodin block that they introduced it. And of course, it makes it so that your thing can't be destroyed, can't die to damage, you know, all that good stuff. And it is an ability that I think they've gone too far with. They have just started throwing it on lots of different cards. We now have about 360 some cards in the game of Magic dealing with Indestructible. That's a lot. Originally, when it came out in Darksteel, there were only 11 cards. Right. And that's when you introduce a new mechanic like that, 11 is a really low number. And the reason why they did that is because they realized, man, this is really powerful. And more to the point, only 2 creatures. There was only 2 indestructible creatures in the entire game of Magic for a while. Darksteel Colossus, of course, being the most notable one. And the other one was Darksteel Gargoyle, just to give you an idea of the power level that they thought Indestructible gave you, which I don't think they were wrong. I mean, here's a 7 mana artifact creature gargoyle, 3/3 with flying and Indestructible. So a 7 mana flying 3/3 that has Indestructible. So obviously, if this was just a flying 3/3 creature, artifact creature, it would probably cost like 3 or 4 mana. But because it has Indestructible, that's how much more expensive they made it, because they thought, man, this ability is really good. And they weren't wrong. And in particular, putting it on a creature. That's why out of the 11 cards they originally printed, only 2 of them were creatures, although you did have Darksteel Brute, which turned itself into a creature, but for 3 mana and only a 2/2, right? So that gives you an idea. And even when they went back to Mirrodin in Scars of Mirrodin, Darksteel Sentinel, 6 mana, 3/3. Flash, Vigilance, Indestructible. So again, you even have a creature that's only a 3/3, Vigilance and Flash, 6 mana, because the Indestructible was such a powerful ability. And one of the issues I think with Indestructible is you don't get the interaction a lot, because, you know, most removal is destroying. And of course, Indestructible gets around that, and it does make things super tough sometimes. One of my least favorite cards of all time is Avacyn, Angel of Hope, of course, which makes everything you have indestructible. I just hate this card. I've always hated it. It's a card that, you know, my brother used to play it a lot, and I played against him. You know, when that Avacyn came down, it just felt like, okay, well, I guess what am I supposed to do now? Like, I maybe have a Path to Exile in my deck that I can use. Other than that, I can do nothing, because 90% of what you typically see in a game of Magic isn't going to work there. Combat damage obviously does nothing. Combat damage is now meaningless when you have an indestructible creature. Again, that's why I think they tried to avoid Indestructible on creatures originally. Now they just throw it around like crazy, right? Now they're just like, Indestructible here, there, everywhere. And what happens is you get a power creep thing, right? This plays into the whole power creep thing where creature removal used to be not very good, right? Like Terror was the best creature removal spell in the game for a while. Creature removal used to be not very good because creatures were really expensive. So what happened is creatures got a lot better for a cheaper price, right? So you got the power creep with creatures. So now you had to start ramping up the creature removal. And then of course, now you have creatures with Indestructible on them. So now because of that, a lot more of these creature removal spells are becoming exile, right? Now you have to exile that creature because there's so many creatures out there with Indestructible on them. And you know, it's not super rare. I think they went a little too far with it. It's a really powerful ability, and they should have kept it very niche. I think they've gone a little bit too far with it. All right, let's talk about gold. And this one is a little specific and why I'm talking about it. So gold is a an ability that I think they've gone way too far with. But, you know, if you look it up, you're like, okay, well, there's only 62 cards in the game of Magic that are goading. That's it, 62 cards. Okay, that's not a lot, right? However, where they've completely gone overboard with it is with the commanders. Of those 62 cards, 23 of them are commanders. There are 23 commanders in the commander format with goad. That's crazy. You just think of other archetypes that are really, really popular that are there 23 commanders that are doing that? 23 is in my opinion insane. To have 23 commanders that are using the goad mechanic is absolutely nuts. Of course, the first one ever doing this is Grenzo Havoc Razor. I believe they introduced goad in that set, right? Conspiracy, or the second conspiracy set, right? Wherever Grenzo came out, that's where they introduced the goad mechanic, which of course immediately became really popular in the commander format. And a lot of people, like the argument people make is it makes people attack. Because apparently there's so many decks now in the commander format where people just don't bother attacking. They just sit there until they combo off. Okay, so I guess if that's a problem in your play group, maybe you want to use goading. For me, I don't have that problem when I play with my patrons online. And whenever someone introduces a goad deck, it's actually really annoying. A lot of people really have started to hate goad because it actually makes it so that you can't play your deck a lot of times. You know, it's a really annoying mechanic. I know a lot of people like it, but forcing your opponent's creatures to attack all the time is super annoying. And you get into situations like I have a couple of patrons with, I mean, I'll use Cardur as an example here, which obviously is not included in the 23 commanders because it's not actually goading. So there's another commander that's doing that. Cardur, which essentially does goading. That I've had a couple of patrons with those decks that they don't even bring them around anymore because people hate playing against it so much, just constantly over and over again, forcing your opponent's creatures to attack. And it makes it so that now I can't play my deck, right? It's another one of those scenarios where you're making it so that I can't play my deck. It really speeds the game up, which some people like, but the fact that everyone is constantly smashing each other really speeds the game up. It can be really annoying. And I think they've gone way too far with it. And in particular, in this situation with this particular mechanic, the commanders that have goad, it's absolutely absurd that there are 23 commanders with goad, in my opinion. All right, next up is food, one I've talked about on my channel quite a bit. Food to me is just the weirdest thing ever. Of course, they originally introduced it in Throne of Eldraine, and right out of the gate, I thought it was a weird mechanic. I was like, okay, you have this artifact token that you sacrifice to gain 3 life. I guess thematically it kind of made sense. Okay, you're eating food and it's making you stronger. Like in a lot of video games, right? You get hurt and you find a hot dog and somehow it heals you. They were kind of using that mentality. I always thought it was weird that it was an artifact token because you think of like a turkey or something. How is that an artifact token? That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? I didn't think it was weird that it was an artifact token. I felt like they made them artifact tokens simply because of clues and treasures. They were already doing that. And they really, again, if not talking about specific mechanics, they've really gone down the creating artifact token thing. Now they have map tokens as well. Again, the commander format, I think, is pushing these kinds of things a lot. Again, we have a whole pile of commanders now that are dealing with food tokens. Of course, when Gaiome first came out, we all remember when Gaiome first came out. That was the first food commander, and everyone just thought it was funny. It was like this meme deck where, oh, you just put a bunch of food themed stuff in there. They just thought it was so funny and goofy because that's all food was. It was just funny and goofy because it wasn't a good mechanic. I don't know if it was a good mechanic in any format. It certainly wasn't a good mechanic in the commander format because using 2 mana to gain 3 life is terrible. That's not good at all. Nobody does it. As I've said, I think, you know, I've played lots of games with food tokens lying around. I've made them myself. Usually I make them because I have an Academy Manufactor like in my Denic deck that I just happen to be getting them anyway. And then they just sit there and I never use them. I think I've seen a food token actually used as it was intended maybe once or twice. actually pay 2 mana, I crack it to gain 3 life. You rarely ever see it. You know, it's one of those things, again, this is the thing that is most perplexing for me, is there must be someone at Wizards of the Coast, maybe Mark Rosewater, that just loves the food mechanic and doesn't want to let it die. There are so many great mechanics throughout the history of the game that they did once in one set and then never revisited them again. Why, I don't know, but yet with food, they keep revisiting it over and over and over. And of course, last year, they went completely nuts with it. They did a ton of it in the Lord of the Rings set, and then they did a ton more of it in the new Eldraine set, right? And so now we have a ton of 113 cards dealing with food in the commander format. That is a whole lot. And again, a whole lot of commanders. Again, we had one. Having like one or two, you know, remember when it used to happen that this was rare? You would get a commander that did clues or food, and you were like, hey, we finally got a clue commander, or we finally got a food commander. Now it's like every set there's a new food commander, right? There's so many of them, and they've gone completely overboard with it. And again, the most perplexing thing for me is this is a mechanic that isn't even good. Nobody actually is looking forward to paying 2 mana to gain 3 life. So they're trying to figure out ways to make the food mechanic better, which is, it's just weird. I don't get it. They've gone way too far with it for sure. Give it a rest. All right, coming at number 2 is Hexproof. And I don't know, there might be some people that, I mean, obviously there's going to be some people that disagree with me on all of these. This probably is the one that I might get the most pushback on. Actually, number 1 is probably the one I get the most pushback on. Yeah, Hexproof is, in my opinion, has always been a sort of pushed ability. Of course, originally we had Shroud, and Shroud made more sense. Again, thematically in the game, flavor-wise, in the game, Shroud made sense. You just had this creature that couldn't be targeted for whatever reason. Hexproof didn't make a ton of sense. It's like, okay, only you can target it, right? Again, you get into the whole idea of how magic works. Here's this creature that's immune to magic, so it can't be targeted by spells or abilities. That makes sense, flavor-wise. Having a creature that can be targeted by you but not anyone else, in my opinion, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or makes less sense flavor-wise. And what a lot of people said is, okay, and this is something that annoys me a little. Of course, Shroud doesn't exist anymore. They don't do it anymore. I don't know what was the last card printed with the word Shroud on it. Maybe it was Lightning Greaves. That comes to mind. I don't know if there's any cards after that. They obviously just stopped doing it and replaced it with Hexproof because, of course, Hexproof is better. But guess what? They then replaced that, as a lot of people have noted. They've now replaced Hexproof with Ward. Now you're seeing Ward all the time. Why? Because Hexproof is busted. Hexproof is way too good just to be throwing it on random creatures all the time. 236 cards that are dealing with Hexproof. Now, not all of those are creatures, of course, but a lot of them are. Most of the cards out there that have Hexproof are creatures. Having a creature with Hexproof is insanely powerful. We've all seen the Slippery Boggle decks, which were like, you know, I mean, they were like world championship decks. That's how good they were. For all of you that have been playing Magic as long as me or longer, remember the Troll Ascetic decks, which came out, I mean, Troll Ascetic came out in Mirrodin, right? That was a creature, like you look at that creature now, it's funny. You look at that creature now and you're like, okay, I mean, can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponent control, also known as Hexproof, obviously, and it regenerates and it's a 3/2. Yeah, that's okay, I guess. That card dominated. That card was so powerful back in the day. It really dominated because just the fact that you could have a creature that only you can target and no one else can is a huge advantage. Absolutely massive advantage, right? There was a lot of complaining back then, let me tell you, about stuff like that. I mean, again, look at Slippery Boggle. That's just a 1/1. A one, like that to me is really shows you the power of Hexproof. You have a 1/1 creature for 1 mana. That's it. But because it has Hexproof, it's allowing you to build a incredibly powerful, incredibly competitive deck. That's how good Hexproof is. It's one of the most powerful abilities. You could argue it's the most powerful ability that, you know, as far as evergreen abilities to put on creatures, you could easily make the argument it's at the top. And again, I think I'm right in this argument because even Wizards of the Coast have realized it, right? Even they've realized, hey, Hexproof is actually really, really good and we should stop throwing it on every single creature we see. So they've started replacing it with a Ward, right? Which is obviously makes it harder for you to remove that creature, but it is a possibility. And I think they're right. And so maybe in this case, I don't even need to be mentioning it because they're already doing it. I believe they're moving in that direction, right? They moved in, let's get away from Shroud and use Hexproof because it's just better, which again, I always thought that was a weird argument because Double strike's better than first strike, so let's stop using first strike and just give every creature double strike. Why would you do that? That's silly, right? Just giving every creature a superior ability seems silly. I don't like that they got rid of Shroud. I liked Shroud. Just like with Lightning Greaves, it's the fair version, in my opinion, of Hexproof, because I can't target my creature either, as everyone knows in their Voltron deck who's put a Lightning Greaves on their commander and then they couldn't get it off to equip it with other stuff. It's the fair version of Hexproof. Hexproof is the busted version of Shroud, right? And again, thankfully, I think they've gotten away from it. And coming in at number one is the mechanic that I think they've gone completely overboard with. And again, more so in the commander format, because just like food and goading, it's more engineered for the commander format. And that is treasures. And, you know, it's funny with treasures. There's a lot to talk about here. This first came out in Ixalan. Funny enough, they had it before. They had gold tokens. A lot of people might remember Curse of Opulence, which is still a reasonably popular card in the format, which came out in C17, I believe, and that made the gold tokens, which are slightly different. You know, they're essentially the same, very slightly different. The only difference being, I believe, the gold tokens, you don't have to tap them for whatever reason. Makar the Gold Cursed also makes gold tokens, so there are a few cards that do that. That would have been, I guess, sort of the first introduction of that concept of you create a token that gives you mana. And then, of course, the treasure tokens came out, and, you know, they weren't that popular, right? Not really at all. I'm trying to think. What were the cards from Ixalan that were creating treasure tokens that people started using in Commander? I don't think they were. And this is it's such a weird one because, again, if treasure tokens were that good, then how come people weren't using all those Ixalan cards in the Commander format right away? They weren't, because it wasn't that good. But then you got a couple of really busted cards that do treasure tokens, and it changed everyone's mindset about treasure tokens and how good they can be, right? You got, of course, first of all, Smothering Tithe. And Smothering Tithe, you know, I'll just say, by the way, people, Smothering Tithe, there wasn't a lot of, you know, people losing their minds over Smothering Tithe when it came out. You know what was mostly, you know, if you looked at the content creators talking about it, you know what people were mostly saying? Oh, this is nice. White has a way, you know, white sucks so bad at ramping. We're so glad that white has a better way, right? That's again, that's what you always got. Whenever there was good white card draw or ramp or anything, that's what people were like, oh, finally, white's got a good way to ramp, right? That's what people were saying. Nobody was saying, oh my God, this card's busted. It's insane. They were saying that pretty soon after. And of course, the same was about Dockside Extortionist, which came out shortly after Smothering Tithe. So you got those two cards in a row, bang, bang, Smothering Tithe and Dockside Extortionist. And that's when everyone started losing their minds about treasure tokens, irrationally, in my opinion. I still think nothing comes close to Smothering Tithe or Dockside Extortionist as far as creating treasure tokens. By the way, both those cards are entirely reliant on your opponents, just saying. We've gotten a few cards, I guess, since, like maybe Bootlegger Stash. Again, that's another card where everyone, in my opinion, irrationally lost their minds over. And I think people might even be calling it for get banned before it even, you know, as soon as it got spoiled. And I'm like, okay, guys, just the treasure token thing, people have gone overboard. But because everyone loves it so much, that has enticed Wizards of the Coast to print more cards, especially in the Commander format. And again, we have a whole bunch of commanders that are now doing the treasure thing. I mean, if you look at the commanders, I mean, I wonder what it is. Commanders that create treasure tokens are goading and are doing food tokens in the Commander format now. That's a whole lot. So just those three, in my opinion, very specific archetypes, you have a whole lot of commanders that are doing that. Too much, in my opinion, way too much. And of course, the Commander format has just been absolutely flooded with treasure token stuff. And, you know, now we're to the point now where any card that comes out that says create a treasure token, people are trying to shoehorn into their deck. Overrated, I'll just say that. Treasure tokens, in my opinion, are overrated in the Commander format. They do have their place, and they can be really, really good, but just shoehorning any card into your deck that says create a treasure token, I think is a little silly. There's now 258 cards in the Commander format that create treasure tokens. And again, most of that is in the last couple of years, right? It was introduced in Ixalan, and there was only a few cards, and not any of them were really that good, so nobody really played them. And then there was, you know, sort of a brief reprieve before they started printing, you know, oddly here and there. You know, we'll print, you know, Smothering Tithe here, Dockside Extortionist. You didn't see them that much. Again, it almost seems like maybe they were trying to make it popular in the format, so that's why they did Smothering Tithe and Dockside Extortionist, or trying to make it more popular in Magic. I mean, again, I don't know how much treasure tokens are played outside of Commander. Certainly in Commander, the format is infested with them. You see them all over the place, and every single set, you know, the new set getting spoiled right now. How much are we going to see? I know we're seeing a lot of clues in that set. Probably not a lot of food. How much are we seeing treasures? I would be interested to see the last like 10 sets that came out. How many of them did not have any treasure stuff? I don't think, is there any? I don't know. It certainly is to the point where they've gone overboard. That's the point of what I'm talking about here. I think they're going a little too far, for sure. And I think a lot of people will probably agree with me on that. That is my opinion, and that is all 5 mechanics, abilities, you know, whatever you want to call it, that Wizards of the Coast or Magic the Gathering has gone too far with. They've really been pushing it in the last few years. And again, a lot of it having to do, I think, with the Commander format, where, oh, people like doing treasures or people like doing goading in the Commander format. So let's just keep it more. Let's slow down, guys. Like you're going a little overboard. A bit much for my liking. Anyway, you guys let me know what you think in the comments below. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.